Welcome back to Untold Diseases 101
with Sarah
and Somia.
Today we will be talking about CJD, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a disease that is 100% lethal.
However, it still remains obscure since there are less than 1,000 cases per year worldwide, and it has been an incurable disease since its first described case in 1920.
Starting off, we'll explain the basics of the disease, how it works, and what you can do to avoid it.
CJD is a prion-type disease that bases its infection in the host's brain, affecting its everyday function, which can be anything from hindering brain transmission to affecting respiratory systems. This disease kills brain tissue and causes spongy degeneration of the brain, according to WHO.int.
This abnormal and infection protein, aka prion, can cause the misfolding of normal brain proteins. These infectious prions continue to spread throughout the outer part of the brain, and they cause damage to your nerve cells. Damage that cannot be reversed, even with modern medicine.
Because of this, 90% of patients infected with this prion will die within a year. Now, imagine encountering such a disease in 1920, when the world of medicine and science was still a mystery to most.
Well, that is exactly what happened when Hans Gerard Creutzfeldt and Alphonse Maria Jacob discovered 6 of these cases.
The two were known as neuropathologists, which are people who specialize in working and observing brain tissues, the area where CJD prions had infested.
At first, it was Alphonse who brought the 6 patients who seemed to have dementia and an abnormal muscle tightness, which are now known to be symptoms of CJD.
A year later, Hans had seen similar cases, and both were recognized as discovering the disease.
The origins of how this disease got to humans, though, was a little more complicated than what they had uncovered in their initial research.
This disease originated from another, which was affecting cattle at the time, one called BSE, but more commonly known as the mad cow disease.
This disease traveled onto humans when humans ate meat from the infected cattle and became known as CJD.
Till this day, no one really knows how a normal protein in the brain changes into an abnormal one.
Even though CJD is quite rare, we do know that there are certain groups of people who are at a higher risk of contracting CJD. Most people displaying symptoms of CJD are 55 to 75 years old.
Neurologists and surgeons who have a higher chance to be exposed to infected tissue are also more likely to contract CJD.
This is because CJD can be spread by contact with infected tissue or contaminated tools, such as the ones surgeons are using in operations, along with many other methods of transmission that we'll cover in depth later.
Another group of people that may be at risk would be patients in need of blood donations or organ donations. CJD can also be transmitted through contaminated blood, and the same applies to organs.
A certainly interesting way you can get CJD is through cannibalism. So cannibalists would be at a higher risk to get CJD.
So, kids, don't be a serial killer and cannibalize.
Now, finally, on a serious note, the UK gets the most CJD cases annually, so take that how you want.
The ratio between female and male cases of contracting CJD is 1-to-1. So everyone, regardless of gender, has an equal chance of being infected. Some of the major signs and symptoms of CJD can include aggressive behavior, memory loss, intellectual loss, personality changes, abnormal movements in one's body, as well as loss of brain function, since the prion itself affects the brain, causing it to take on a spongy texture.
The symptoms and signs can appear after the initial exposure, or it could even take longer depending on the person and whether it's CJD or not.
The symptoms of CJD are caused because of the damage done to the brain prion. The functions of these prions are compromised, which can cause a myriad of problems in the host.
Although no one's completely sure of the tasks these proteins perform, their malfunction can cause the host memory loss and loss of movement throughout their body, and in certain cases, it can also cause personality changes.
It can also cause aggressive behavior in the host, as well as loss in intellect, balance, speech, and other brain functions.
So, conclusively, we can infer that these proteins were responsible for protecting the brain from stress and cell signaling.
Now, when these are infected with CJD prion, it would hinder their ability to give specific commands to the rest of the body, causing abnormal movements and dementia.
Imagine forgetting you even had CJD. Although these symptoms would mean that death is near, and with a 100% fatality rate, this could mean the end of the host's life.
Now, onto the main diagnosis, or pathology, of this life-threatening disease.
As we've said before, the main way CJD was diagnosed was through its symptoms and a scan of brain proteins, aka a brain biopsy or even an autopsy. This scan would check for misfolded protein, or a prion protein that infects and causes other proteins to form abnormally as well. These proteins essentially cause neurodegenerative disorders such as CJD.
As we've said before, this can cause a myriad of symptoms throughout the body, from abnormal movements to personality changes. However, at the end of the infection period, the patient will die due to heart failure or respiratory failure.
This brain disease can essentially ruin your body's function completely.
And there are several types of this disease, depending on how you contracted the disease.
One being sporadic CJD, which progresses quickly. VCJD is slower to take effect, but both end up fatal. People with sporadic CJD generally lose their ability to care for themselves within 6 months, with death shortly following.
Generally, the length of this disease from onset to death is on average 4 to 8 months. Although there have been exceptions, but those are extremely rare, since about 90% of the infected individuals die within a year.
There are 4 different types of CJD, which is decided by how they're transferred. The first being sporadic CJD, which makes up about 90% of CJD cases. Sporadic CJD means a normal brain protein malfunctions and mutates to an abnormal prion. This can happen spontaneously, and according to NIH.gov, prion diseases can be caused by certain genetic mutations.
The second being familial CJD, which is inherited from predecessors who had CJD. The third is iatrogenic CJD, which is spread by direct exposure with contaminated objects. For example, equipment used in medical procedures operating on CHD-infected patients can spread CJD as well.
Another example of iatrogenic CJD would be if you got CJD from an infected blood donor or an organ donor.
The fourth is variant CJD, VCJD. It can spread between species, a prion disease that affects elk, moose, deer, and cattle. BSE and CWD can be transmitted between species if infected tissue is consumed or if contaminated by bodily fluid of the infected animal.
For example, variant CJD is believed to be transmitted to humans through the consumption of cattle infected with BSE.
In the U.S. itself, there are about 350 cases each year, with 200 to 600 cases annually worldwide.
The host will experience dementia, personality changes, and abnormal body movement, which can essentially hinder their lifestyle, social activities, work, and home life.
They will need help to complete daily tasks such as cooking, shopping, and others.
It will also, eventually, lead them to become bedridden because of an abnormal body movements and lack of control over them.
After around 6 months, they need someone to take care of them constantly.
Along with that, anger issues due to the disease can also compromise certain relationships.
Therefore, this disease not only kills your body, but also your mind and spirit. It will affect every aspect of your life, from home life to work and social life.
Unfortunately, there are no existing treatments for this disease, though researchers have been working on an antibiotic that can potentially work as a treatment. According to NIHR.UK, researchers at the NIHR UCLH Biomedical Research Center, or BRC, developed a monoclonal antibody called PRN-100 that was given to 6 patients with CJD between October 2018 and July 2019.
Disease progression stabilized in 3 out of the 6 patients, and none of them experienced any side effects due to the antibiotic. However, all of them, sadly, passed away due to the condition anyways.
Thus, there still are no existing treatments for this disease.
You have a very low chance of ever contracting this disease, so almost no prevention would be needed. However, there are things you can do to lower your chances of getting CJD even further. Sporadic CJD and familial CJD cannot be prevented and is out of your control. However, you can avoid other variants by making sure that the farms you get your meat from do not have cattle infected with this deadly disease.
And if you're a doctor working with infected tissue or brain tissue in general, make sure you sterilize your tools and follow safety protocols. As for needing blood or organ transplants, make sure that your donor is not infected with CJD, because once you contract this disease, there is no way to go back to your old life, no cure or treatment.
However, many doctors offer antidepressants and painkillers to patients with CJD, as simply having this disease can cause extreme stress and anxiety. Doctors simply try to do whatever they can to relieve some of the patient's pain and make them as comfortable as possible in their last hours. As we said before, USCF researchers, Prime Clinic Studies, and researchers at the NIHR UCLH Biomedical Research Center, or BRC, are looking for a cure. They've made a breakthrough in research, finding something surprising about microglia.
Microglia, the resident innate immune cells of the central nervous system, according to NIH-Gov, is part of the body's response to injury and infection. When you are infected with CJD, microglia actually causes CJD to spread further, acting as a sort of Trojan horse.
According to NIH.gov, the immune inflammatory response dominated by microglia was found to be a characteristic feature in CJD. The presence of activated microglial cells in the various activation stages, regardless of illness duration, indicates continuous microglial activity and microglial contribution to the spread of the infection for the whole symptomatic period of the disease.
All right, dear listeners, you've come to the end of our journey together for now.
Thank you for listening to our exclusive podcast about Untold Diseases 101, about Creutzfeldt-Jakob prion disease, a disease that quite literally destroyed every aspect of the host's life.
From its first steps in infecting the brain with a prion to its last, leaving you with your organ systematic failures and a 100% fatality rate. See you next time on Untold Diseases 101,
where we will leave no effort in bringing you another bone-chilling disease.